Welcome to Bruce Hurwitz Presents Meet the Experts. I'm your host, Bruce Hurwitz of Hurwitz Strategic Staffing. I hope you'll consider us for all your staffing, career counseling, and professional writing needs. Momentarily, I will be joined by Frank King for a discussion on suicide prevention. Meet the Experts is sponsored by P&K CPAs. P&K is a full-service accounting firm. They provide accounting and consulting services to businesses ranging from startups to small and mid-cap companies to nonprofits as well as high-net-worth individuals. Contact them today for a free consultation at info@pk-cpas.com or call them at 973-882-8810. They will be happy to be of service. Frank, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
It is my pleasure. Please take a moment or two and introduce yourself to our viewers.
How much detail do you want, Bruce?
Whatever you can get through in a moment or two.
Okay. Frank King. I'm the mental health comedian. I was a writer for The Tonight Show for 20 years. I've been a full-time and professional speaker, comedian, coach for 38 years. I have 12 TEDx Talks, all on mental health, number 13 coming up in November. I live with 2 mental illnesses, major depressive disorder, chronic suicidal ideation, and I've come close enough to killing myself, I can tell you what the barrel of my gun tastes like. Spoiler alert, I did not pull the trigger.
And we're glad you didn't.
Me too.
Now, I have 2 stories to quickly tell.
Okay.
The first, this was when I was working at a mental health center for children in Jerusalem. One of the mothers called up and said she was going to, her husband was a police officer. She told me that, and I was not a therapist, I was only responsible for the administrative things. And she said she was going to kill her husband, her son, and herself.
Huh.
So I spoke to her. I convinced her to give me 15 minutes to get the coordinator to call her back because the coordinator was located at that moment in a different site. And I ran a 3-minute mile and went running down the stairs and handed a note to the coordinator of the program with the woman's number on it. They all asked me what happened. I told them what I just told you, and then the coordinator picked up the phone and called her. And then they asked me what I said to her. This was a group of therapists, including a psychologist, and I said, I don't remember. And they said, perfectly normal, don't worry about it. You're living right now on adrenaline and endorphins. So once you calm down, maybe it'll come to you. So about 15 minutes later, the coordinator came out. She said, Bruce, what did you say to her? And I said, I don't know. I don't remember. And I wasn't making a joke. I was being absolutely serious. And she said, well, whatever you said was the right thing. She's calm now. She's in control of her faculties. And she wants you to be her therapist.
What?
So I started to tease the therapists because I was going for my PhD in international relations. And I said, well, you know, I'm not interested in any of this therapy nonsense. I'm a serious scholar, at which point they knew I was okay and they threw me out, which was
And well, they should have.
another time, and I'll spare everybody the details. I literally talked someone down who was absolutely convinced he was going to kill himself. There was no question about it. And I was able to talk him down. Again, don't remember what I said to him. But what I learned from this is that when somebody is very nervous and very upset, and they say they're going to kill themselves, doesn't mean they're going to kill themselves. And when somebody is very calm, there was another time when a colleague said they had spoken to someone and they were now calm and everything was okay. And I forced her to call the police to go and check on them, and he was about to kill himself. So if someone is very upset and they say they're going to kill themselves, they might not. If
Mhm.
somebody is very calm and says everything is fine, I just signed up for classes and I've got a new girlfriend, boyfriend, they could blow their head off an hour later. So
Yeah.
how do you know when someone is serious about killing themselves?
Well, are you asking about signs and symptoms?
Yeah. So
Okay.
there's somebody for a relative, for a friend who is dealing with someone who is suicidal, when should they press the panic button and call 911?
Well, if they suspect they are suicidal for whatever reason,
Mhm.
whether the person is living in depression, um, the signs you're looking for, um, they talk about death and dying quite a bit. Maybe you catch them Googling death, dying, or how to die by suicide. They're gathering the means, meaning stockpiling medication or buying a firearm. They are getting their affairs in order, visiting friends and relatives perhaps they haven't visited in some time, and giving away prized possessions because they want to make sure they go to the people they want them to go to when they're gone.
Oh,
And on your, they're very calm, that's when you worry. That's a counterintuitive but a very dangerous sign. They've been depressed for a long time and now they are happier, upbeat for no apparent reason.
mhm.
And you're relieved because they're happy. Well, the problem is they may be happy or calm or upbeat because they've chosen time, place, and method, and they know the pain is coming to an end. A lot of people don't realize that in many cases, the person doesn't want to kill themselves. I didn't want to kill myself. I simply wanted to end the pain, and they're upbeat because they know the pain is finite. It's coming to an end. So if you see any or all of those, you're looking for a pattern. I would say, have to ask them flat out, are you having thoughts of suicide? And if they say yes, then you say, do you have a plan? And if they have a plan,
Mhm.
and if it's detailed, time, place, and method, you need to get them to a mental health facility as soon as possible, simply for evaluation.
Mhm.
If they have a plan and it's not particularly detailed, and there's nothing in the literature I can find on this, so I made up something myself, I would say, well, tell me, are you going to kill yourself? And if they said no, I would say, okay, tell me why not. Make them give voice to whatever's keeping them here because something is keeping them here. Otherwise, you wouldn't be having this conversation. And then whatever they say, parents, pets, religion, children, whatever, I would leverage that to do my best to keep them alive for another day.
I have a wicked sense of humor.
Hey, join the club.
Yeah, and sometimes I get into trouble. I
Me
have
too.
suffered from foot and mouth disease on a number of times. Well, one thing I've always been smart enough not to do is to joke about two things: suicide and addictions.
Hmm.
You are the mental health, hang on, I forget what it is exactly. The mental health comedian. I did remember.
Correct.
How do you joke about mental health?
Well, good question. And one I get asked frequently. Do you tell jokes about suicide, depression, mental illness? No, there's nothing to joke about. I share funny personal anecdotes. You remember I said, spoiler alert, I didn't
Yeah.
pull the trigger?
Uh-huh.
A friend of mine was at a keynote. He'd never heard me say, spoiler alert, I didn't pull the trigger. It's a friend of mine, longtime friend. Comes up afterward and says this, and I quote, hey man, how come you didn't pull the trigger? I go, hey man, could you try to sound slightly less disappointed? So it's things like that. I was talking to a meeting plan. I was going to do a keynote. I said, what do you want me to cover? Now she knows I put a gun in my mouth, but she says, I don't know, just give me some bullet points. So I let that hang in the air. And then you hear her go, oh, 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 oh. I said, relax, Michelle. It was just too good to let it go by.
Yeah, yeah, no.
So that's the kind of thing, and that's one of the reasons, one of the top couple of reasons I get booked because they want the lived experience. My depression, suicide run in my family, my grandmother, my great aunt, my mother, me. I have two mental illnesses. I've got that experience. They want the learning objectives, teach them something, which I do. But when you can leaven that with some well-placed, organic, tasteful, humorous anecdotes, it makes it go down so much easier. It makes it more memorable. It's, they call it comic relief for a reason.
I was just thinking of a colleague who came into work, and as we're eating lunch, she said, yesterday I was choking and I couldn't breathe. My husband was there. He performed the Heimlich maneuver on me. And I looked at her and I said, "Did it work?" And she said, "Yeah." And then she started to laugh.
Yeah.
So I hear what you're saying. I wanted to clarify it. When somebody, there are a lot of times you don't know what's wrong with you.
Mm-hmm.
I had, for example, I was moody. I had hot flashes. I was just a miserable person. And I went to the doctor and I was diagnosed with Graves' disease, which is when your thyroid goes kaploty.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I tell people that except for the obvious, it's the same symptoms as menopause, which is accurate.
Yeah.
Which is accurate. And for those who don't know, hot flashes are the worst. Mood swings you can live with. Lack of sleep you can live with. The hot flashes were killing me. Once I found out, even though it's a disease and it's serious, I felt better. Now, is it the same thing with depression? When the doctor says to you, you are clinically depressed, or whatever the terminology is, does it make you feel better knowing that you've actually got something and what it is?
But yes, and as they say in improv, when I speak, I tell the audience that I have major depressive disorder, relatively common, and chronic suicidal ideation, which is relatively uncommon. I mean, I've said chronic suicidal ideation out loud to a therapist who's been doing it for 20 years, and they stare at me like a pig staring at a wristwatch. They have no idea what I'm talking about. And so I say to the audience, look, let me, in the form of a story, let me describe what that is.
Please.
It means for me and people in my tribe, the option of suicide is always on the menu as a solution for problems large and small. And when I say small, 3 years ago, my car broke down. And I had three thoughts unbidden. One, get it fixed. Two, buy a new one. Three, I could just kill myself. That's chronic suicidal ideation. And every time I've spoken, or almost every time I've spoken, there's been at least one person in the audience who has chronic suicidal ideation. They have no idea it has a name. They think they're just some kind of freak and completely alone. Last month, a young woman came up to me afterwards, because I always do general Q&A, and then I say, look, if you got a story you want to share or a question you want to ask, and you don't want to ask it in front of everybody, like, hey, Frank, I'm crazy. Can you help me? Then I'll stick around 30, 45 minutes, take them individually. So she comes up and she's crying so hard she cannot speak. So I said, you have chronic suicidal ideation. She nods. I said, you didn't know it had a name. You just thought you're some kind of freak. Nod. I said, do you have a therapist back home? Nod. Well, when you get back home, set an appointment, tell your therapist everything you learned today, and for goodness sakes, tell me you Googled it. Don't tell me you learned it from a comedian. And a week later, I got an email from her. She said, Frank, I think I was at that conference in large part simply to meet you. You have changed my life. And I can't say that about a lot of people. So just knowing it has a name, it's a thing, and other people live with it is, and that happens over and over and over.
I'm at my doctor. I don't know what you call her, nurse, receptionist, whatever, sets up my next appointment, and she asked me if I want a card, confirming the day and time of the appointment. And I said, no, I put it in my phone. And if I lose my phone, I'll kill myself. So it doesn't matter. I won't need the appointment. She laughs like you're doing. The doctor does not laugh. He comes over and says, what did you say? What's going on? I said, relax. It was a joke. And for whatever reason, I never asked him. But I knew at that moment that around him, I can't joke like that. Now, it could be
No.
because he lost a patient or he lost a family member to suicide. And it's not something you joke around with.
Well, or as a doctor, if somebody gives voice to that, some states they're duty bound to have you hauled in front of a judge to decide whether you get a 3-day involuntary hold.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've had that same conversation, and I've joked about it in front of a therapist, and they you know, and I have to say, look, I'm just kidding, and they say, well, you know, you be careful saying that because you know you really don't want that vacation. So, and I think that's part of the problem. If I could speak about it out loud in front of a therapist, a doctor, you know, I think I met a guy one night at an engagement where I was doing comedy, but I told my table mates, you know, that I speak on suicide prevention, I have chronic suicidal ideation, and the guy followed me to the bathroom, 69 years old. He said, Frank, I have that. I have chronic suicidal ideation. And then he said, I have never told anybody that, including my therapist. Because in California, where I was performing, it's called a 5150. That's the code in the law. If he told his therapist what he told me, he's going in front of a judge. So if we could just allow people to give voice to their, you know, feelings and experiences around suicide, I think we could save people.
That was actually going to be my next question, is the 72-hour period nationwide or statewide? Is it
I think it's by the state. I'm not sure every state has it. I know California does, and a goodly number of others. I don't know if there are states where it's not mandated. And I don't want to find out.
Okay. What do you not say if you believe that a person is suicidal? What do you not say to them?
You are just seeking attention. You're being melodramatic. Nobody who talks about it ever does it.
Now, a friend who's a psychiatrist once told me that when people slit their wrists, it's just a cry for help because that's very easily mitigated. You put a tourniquet on and it's over with. If they were serious, they would cut something else.
Well, they would go hard. They would go rather than across.
I didn't want to say that. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, they go up, and I've got a friend who's done that twice. And he was serious. Although he was able to get medical care, he just changed his mind, wrapped it up, went to the emergency room, spent 3 days in the involuntary hold. But yeah, well, you know, women apparently attempt suicide 3 times as often as men. Men tend to complete because they use a firearm.
Women, as I understand, use poison.
Yes, medications, pills.
Well, same thing, you know.
Yeah, or razor blade.
What about veterans? You know, the mission of my company is to promote the hiring of veterans. And the suicide rate amongst veterans is disgusting.
Yes. 22 a day.
Yeah. Very few therapists have been through what a veteran has been through.
Yeah.
So how important is it for the therapist and the patient to have shared experiences related to the cause of the suicide?
Well, let me share a joke with you. It's an old one on that topic. It's how many a Vietnam veteran asks somebody who wasn't there, how many Vietnam veterans does it take to screw in a light bulb? And the person goes, I don't know. That's right, man, because you weren't there. That's that experience. It turns out, however, Bruce, in in the research I've done, that the number one cause, I guess, of veteran suicide is not deployment in a war zone. It's more likely separation from the military, because people identify themselves often by the jobs they have, and I've heard this from several veteran friends of mine, and in the civilian world, there's no one watching your back. There's no real team. I have a friend who served on submarines, and he considered everybody he served with a family of sorts. That was very hard for him when he was separated. He was forced to retire after 26 years. That was apparently as long as you could do it.
Yeah.
And he suffered mightily, losing that family and that, those people having his best interest at heart and having his back. And veterans, I've heard it over and over. In the civilian world, it's not like that. It's not like a family. It's not like you've got a unit, covering each other's back. So yeah, the of the suicides, I believe the number one, PTSD and such follows, could be 2, 3, or whatever. But number one was the actual separation from the military. So to answer your question, I think in the therapist business for decades, maybe longer, it wasn't a rule, but it was sort of wasn't a written down rule. It was just a rule of thumb, I guess, that you didn't share your diagnosis with your patients, even if you and the patient had similar diagnosis. The joke I heard was, you don't get a massage. When the massage therapist is done, say, okay, now let me do you. So I think that's a mistake. I don't think you should overshare, but I think if you have something similar or gone through something similar that the patient has, share that you live with that condition. I did it at college, and a young woman came up afterwards. She said, "Can I give you a hug?" And I said, "This is right at the height of the Me Too movement, and everybody in the room's got a phone with a video recorder or a camera." And I'm thinking, I can see the headline tomorrow: "Speaker gropes co-ed."
Yeah.
So I gave her a very brotherly hug. I pushed my pelvis back as far as I possibly could. And then I said to her, "Are you a hugger?" She goes, "No, I'm not a hugger." I go, "Well, why the hug?" She goes, "Frank, I've been in therapy for 2 years. And the woman who's a therapist, she's got lots of diplomas on the wall. She knows her stuff academically, but she really doesn't have any context. She said, I'm sitting in the back of the room, listening to your little keynote. You talk about your mental illness, near suicide, family history. And after about 15 minutes, I'm thinking, this guy's inside my freaking head. You did more for me in 45 minutes than she's done for me in 2 years.
Yeah.
So I think, if someone has experience in a war zone, or somebody's separated from the military, or, has that kind of experience, I think, that would be a good thing to, not overshare, but share.
How can people find resources, both to help themselves and to help someone they care about?
For someone they care about, I would find the local chapter of the National Alliance of Mental Illness, NAMI. Most counties of any size have a NAMI chapter, and the NAMI chapter has, for the families or loved ones of someone with a mental condition or behavioral issue, they have a 12-week class once a week in the evenings, and they teach you signs, symptoms, what to say, what not to say, how to find resources. And then the next step is they've got family-to-family counseling. So you find out there are other families with loved ones that have the same condition. They have peer-to-peer counseling. And the best thing about NAMI, National Alliance of Mental Illness, everything they do is free. So that's where I'd start. If you have, let's say you've got a young person, a child, or someone you care about has schizoaffective disorder, you need to, and that's how I found out about it. One of my friends, a State Farm agent here in town, has a son with schizoaffective disorder, and it was destroying the family. And he discovered NAMI in a 12-week program, and the family's still together, and the son is relatively productive. But NAMI saved them. So that's where I'd start. And then if you're looking for individual therapy, I would go and type in, I'm in Lane County. I would type in mental health services, Lane County, free. And what'll happen is you'll get a Google search and it will begin with the free services. And then below that will probably be the sliding scale services. And below that will probably be you've got Cadillac insurance, with a low copay. But you'll get a list of, now here's a trick. Therapists are pretty busy these days. So you may have to get on a waiting list for a psychologist, for a psychiatrist, for a therapist, because they are busy.
Mhm. I'm going to share your contact information.
No.
I will, and I will ask you. I wanted to jokingly ask you, when you get up and tell people that you suffer from the two conditions you articulated, do you then say, keep that in mind if you're when you're thinking about whether or not to laugh at my jokes?
No, by that point, by the time I reveal the first joke I tell, the spoiler alert, I didn't pull the trigger, gets a nervous laugh.
Uh-huh.
And I say, it's okay to laugh. That was the point. And then I tell the story about my friend coming up. Why didn't you pull the trigger? And I get a bigger laugh.
Mhm.
So they understand. When I did my first TEDx talk, my first funny anecdote in it was, I went to the TED.com site to see how other people handle the topic of suicide. I figured there'd be 2-3 dozen, maybe more talks on suicide. And actually, there were only 3. And then I said to the audience, well, duh, if you're really good at suicide, chances are you're not going to be recording a TEDx talk. Again, a nervous laugh. And then the next joke got a much bigger laugh. And the third one got a roar, because they realized that was what I was after. It was going to be serious information delivered with humor.
The serious question I was going to ask you, which is my final question, is there anything that I have not asked you that you wish I had asked you? And if I had asked you, what would you have said?
I would have asked me, Frank, is there any good news? And I would say, because I tell the audience this, yes, there is good news. 8 out of 10 people who are suicidal on average are ambivalent. They cannot make up their minds. 9 out of 10 on average give hints in the last week leading up to an attempt. And what I do is the Donald Miller build a story brand technique, empower the audience. I say to them, which means you can make a difference. You can save a life. And you can do it by something as simple as what we're doing right here. And that is starting a conversation if you know how. And I just taught you how.
Frank, I thank you profusely. You've provided important information, and maybe you've even saved a life today. So I thank you on my behalf and on behalf of our viewers.
And that is my goal, to save a life a day. And can I take us out as a comedian would take us out on a podcast?
Shoot.
Okay.
I didn't mean that.
Yeah, see there?
Go ahead.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe, and tell your friends. If you did not enjoy this podcast, well, we hope you have no friends.
It's very good. I might steal it.
You should.
All right. I thank you, Frank.
My pleasure.
I'm Bruce Hurwitz. Thank you for watching. And as always, please stay focused on success.